The presidential aspirations of a two-year veteran of the Senate from California, Kamala Harris, have been turbocharged by a powerful debate performance last night in Miami. And for all of the talk in the hours since that debate concluded about her standoff with Democratic frontrunner Joe Biden, there were several moments that showcased Harris's strength and clarity around three issues central to the Democratic primary and the debates roiling the nation. First, here's Senator Harris bringing the entire debate back to kitchen table issues.
Senator Harris, I'm so sorry. We will let all of you speak. Senator Harris. Senator Harris. Please, we will let you all speak. Senator Harris.
We can't afford to wait for evolution on these issues.
Hey, guys, you know what? America does not want to witness a food fight. They want to know how we're going to put food on their table. This president walks around talking about and flouting his great economy, right? My great economy, my great economy. You ask him, well, how are you measuring this greatness of this economy of yours? And he talks about the stock market. Well, that's fine if you own stocks. So many families in America do not. You ask them, how are you measuring the greatness of this economy of yours? And they point to the jobless numbers and the unemployment numbers. Well, yeah, people in America are working. They're working 2 and 3 jobs. So when we talk about jobs, let's be really clear. In our America, no one should have to work more than one job to have a roof over their head and food on the table.
And here's Harris on the tragedy unfurling on the U.S. border with Mexico.
A mother who pays a coyote to transport her child through their country of origin, through the entire country of Mexico, facing unknown peril, to come here. Why would that mother do that? I will tell you. Because she has decided for that child to remain where they are is worse. But what does Donald Trump do? He says, go back to where you came from. That is not reflective of our America and our values, and it's got to end.
Another moment getting attention today, Harris on race.
We're going to get to you. Hang on. We're going to get to
stage. I would like to speak on the issue of race. There is not a black man I know, be he a relative, a friend, or a coworker, who has not been the subject of some form of profiling or discrimination. Growing up, my sister and I had to deal with the neighbor who told us her parents couldn't play with us because we were black.
And that led directly to the moment that's been playing in a near constant loop. Harris taking on Joe Biden's suggestion that he'd been able to find a way to work with 2 known segregationists during his time in the U.S. Senate.
It was hurtful to hear you talk about the reputations of 2 United States senators who built their reputations and career on the segregation of race in this country. And it was not only that, but you also worked with them to oppose busing. And, you know, there was a little girl in California who was part of the second class to integrate her public schools. And she was bused to school every day. And that little girl was me.
Now, Vice President Biden disputes Harris's attack there and made it a point to address that moment at an event in Chicago this afternoon.
I heard and I listened to and I respect Senator Harris. But, you know, we all know that 30 seconds to 60 seconds on a campaign debate exchange can't do justice to a lifetime committed to civil rights. I want to be absolutely clear about my record and position on racial justice, including busing. I never, ever opposed voluntary busing. And as a program that Senator Harris participated in, and it made a difference in her life. I did support federal action to address root causes of segregation in our schools and our communities, including taking on the banks and redlining and trying to change the way in which neighborhoods were segregated. I've always been in favor of using federal authority to overcome state-initiated segregation.
That is where we start today with some of our most favorite reporters and friends. The Rev Al Sharpton, host of Politics Nation here on MSNBC, senior advisor to MoveOn.org, Karine Jean-Pierre, plus NBC and MSNBC national affairs analyst John Heilemann, and the editor-in-chief for HuffPost, Lydia Polgreen. I have been listening to all of you all week. I have been dying to talk to you today
I thought you were going to say, I'm so sick of all of you.
You are the show today. I mean, I have nothing but time, and I want to hear you on both of this, on her night, not just the standoff with Biden. That is not the sum total of what happened last night, and that I have participated in reducing it to that. I think is a disservice, which is why we wanted to start with all of those moments, because strung together, they will explain any bounce she has in the polls, which I would predict. But Joe Biden today taking another stab at putting this into context, and I want you to speak to sort of the substance and the effort.
I think that when you look at, first of all, the debate last night, I was sitting up front watching it. Joe Biden said that he was supporting the local school boards doing the decisions, not the federal government, which is tantamount to saying I support states' rights. He said that. That's not Kamala Harris confusing what he said. And if you need a day to explain that you were not with states' rights, you only made the situation worse. I'm talking about what he said out of his mouth, which was stunning to me. Last Saturday,
just to give me the version for dummies for that. I mean, that is not just. I mean, that has all sorts of problematic connotations.
Well, the problematic connotations she raised last night. When he said that, she said that federal government had to intervene. That's how we got the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act. The only way the Civil Rights Movement operated toward any kind of achievement is the federal government had to protect them against states that would never outlaw segregation. Similar to how in the Civil War, if you didn't have a strong national union, the Confederate states were involved. For him to say that he supported the local school boards making the decision is for him to say we're going back to states' rights and the federal government not intervene. And that was a point. The federal government had designated busing. One of the things that I think people miss is that a lot of the civil rights leadership came out of the South. She and I are like 9 years apart. We both were bused in the North. And a lot of the people did not want to deal with the racism in the North. Busing in Brooklyn or Boston or Berkeley, where she was from, was a traumatic experience because we were going in the neighborhoods where we were called names and all of that. That's what she was raising, that we lived. He is used to the generation of Southern-born civil rights leaders where you could play liberal when you visited down South, but don't send your kid to my school when I get home. And that's what that was so reminiscent of last night when he said that, and so painful. Like when I sat with him last Saturday on my show in South Carolina and said, don't you understand when you talk about boy and son, they would never call me son because they don't see me as a part of their family. Boy, when you raise that, is what they call not only me, my daddy, my granddaddy. We were never able to be a man. I understand it, but he wouldn't apologize. And all he had to do was deal with the pain he caused. All of us have said things we shouldn't say. But when you don't feel like you're going to apologize, when you act like that's a bridge too far, we're going to play politics with people's real pain, that's when you end up in a situation that he ended up with last night. And I think Kamala Harris, I'm not endorsing anybody, but I think she really talked about the pain because a lot of us had to get on those northern buses and face hostility every day.
Okay.
So I want to give her some more credit, which is, you know, when I was watching last night, I thought to myself that line from The Wire that famous line that people use a lot, which is when you come from the king, you best not miss. And she didn't miss. She went for Biden and she went in. And the way that she did it was so masterful, was so surgical. And what she did was she used something that's incredibly important to him, which is his 40-year record. And then she leaned in on an issue that's really important to all of us, which is the history of racial inequality, especially in this 2020 election when you have Donald Trump. And what she did was she weaved in her personal story. And that is something that is purely masterful. And she executed that. And it had so much impact for so many people. I've been watching these kind of not focus groups, but these debate watches, especially in South Carolina, where people have come out and said, look, that didn't happen to me, but I can feel what she is saying. And I know people who went through that. And after she did that, the campaign, what did they do? They tweeted out a picture of a Kamala Harris in second grade, basically during that time of being bused. And it was just really, I've been in debate.
Put that picture up on the screen.
Yeah, I've been in debate preps, especially in the last cycle. I've worked on a couple of presidential cycles, and it is hard to have done what she managed to do. And you come out of a post debate and you think, okay, you wonder, are you worse off or better off? And she has managed to be better off. And so she used something personal and was able to tell a story, which is not easy to do. And she prosecuted her case to be president of the United States, to take on Trump come to general election if she's the nominee. And you got to give her and her campaign credit for that.
Howman, are we making too much of one night?
No, I don't think so. Well, maybe some people are. I think, look, there's, I've been all over television saying that I think she, was clearly the winner of the 2 days. She gave the best performance of anybody in the measurable sense that Karine alludes to. It's like, I'm always looking at, you walk in, you're trying to accomplish certain things, till you walk out the door, there's only one goal, to become the Democratic nominee. Is she in a better position to be the Democratic nominee today than she was yesterday? She is, manifestly. We'll see what kind of a bounce she gets. We'll see what kind of a hit he takes. In either case, she's done this thing. The mantra for her campaign, the frame for it, which is, I'm the prosecutor who can best prosecute the case against Donald Trump. So she demonstrates the prosecutorial skill. She's on stage with another septuagenarian white man, not like Donald Trump in almost any other way except for that, the image. She wants to make people in the Democratic Party be able to imagine what would it be like to see her on stage against Donald Trump. In that sense, narrow sense, Joe Biden becomes the proxy for Donald Trump. So she shows what it's like. She shows and not tells. You had people all over social media and all in my email inbox and my text messages from Democrats all over the place saying, you saw that. I want that woman to go against Donald Trump. She would kick his butt, which is exactly the thing that she's trying to engender. And in a funny way, not only does she open up a big wide seam on some difficult questions for Joe Biden about his history on issues of crime, on issues of race, but also she takes away from him that thing that he has clung to, which is, I'm the best one to take on Donald Trump. She's saying, no, look, I'm going to take you down to size. I'm going to make you politically vulnerable, and I'm going to show that I'm better at your game than you are. I mean, in what world is that not just an unequivocal win? And to your point, finally, even if the Biden thing hadn't happened, she scored in every time she spoke. There was not a moment that she missed. Every time she opened her mouth, she scored a direct hit on whatever she was trying to hit. And she was at various times human. She was funny. She was emotional. It was just a sterling debate performance top to bottom.
I would add to that every time she's opened her mouth and a camera has been on her since she first mused about running, that has been the case. I mean, not just her prosecution of William Barr, who's a million times smarter than Donald Trump, who she completely took apart, one pleasant, polite question at a time. In the hallway 10 minutes later, she was just as effective and actually managed to squeeze another line of attack and another news cycle out of it. So the performance was not an outlier. It was an extension of every moment we've seen from her.
I would say this. She has had weaker moments, and she has had mistakes. She's made mistakes.
Probably,
she's made mistakes on health care. She has given speeches in places where I've heard from Democrats who've said that they were unimpressed with her, that they thought she was not as good as she was on her announcement speech. She had a moment where she, for some number of months, with some exceptions, where she kind of hit a trough. And I actually think it speaks also to her quality as a candidate. All candidates who go on to be the nominee of their party, their capacity for growth, do they get better as they go along? What she did was she came out very strong. She kind of like fell into a bit of a trough, with the exception of a couple of big television moments on the Hill. But the fact that she's raised her game, both at South Carolina, where Rev and I saw her last week, where she gave a great speech to the South Carolina Democratic Convention, best speech I've ever seen her give from a stumps perspective, and then to do this on the debate stage tells you that she's learning as a candidate, and that's really maybe the most important quality you could have if you're going to go the long haul in this game.
I mean, I think the thing that she really accomplished, to my mind, was really combating this idea of electability, right? And putting herself in position as presidential. I mean, the thing that she did that was kind of amazing was she had a pen in her hand, and it was like, bring those bills and I'll sign them on the Resolute desk. There was this image of her just being fully in command. And I think that's going to really stick with a lot of people. It was unmistakable, this idea that this is a leader who's ready to take on really big challenges. It was just a masterful performance.
I was going to ask you about electability, because I think that these were not problems that she had. They may have been just questions that the broader electorate, people that don't watch her on the Hill and didn't sit glued to the bar hearings. I mean, these were questions that she answered. Electability. I think she answered some hunger in the Democratic Party for generational change. She answers some questions and some hunger for a woman in that office. She answers the question and speaks to the hunger for diversity. I mean, she is the answer to almost every question that I hear Democrats asking.
Well, and I think she also found a very deft way to deal with what has been one of her vulnerabilities, which is her record as a prosecutor, right? I mean, we at HuffPost have written a lot of quite tough stories investigating her background on things like truancy, where you had ended up with kids going into the criminal justice system for really no reason because of overly harsh laws that she prosecuted when she was the Attorney General of California. And this has really been a point of vulnerability for her, but by couching her own experience with race. And I think another place where I think people have overstated that vulnerability is that they forget that African Americans care a lot about crime because they are disproportionately victims of crime, right? And a tough prosecutor who's seen as fair and competent, who comes from that community, I think actually does have a certain power and a role to play. So,
and it's a complete inoculation from what we already know, what's been telegraphed on the right, which is to paint the entire Democratic Party as too far to the left. I mean, it's just in the mind of rational people.
Well, I think I totally agree with her. I think that's where they she robs them. You're talking about a lady that was a district attorney and then went on to be state attorney general.
Yeah.
So you can't say she's soft on crime. And she was attacked a lot by the left. I mean, we question her in some cases in National Action Network. So you can't say that. But when she talks about I was bust and that I went in and built a career, that answers a lot of the attacks on the left, because some of them didn't even go that trajectory. But I think something else that was very interesting to me, going into the hall last night, everyone was waiting for Bernie Sanders to do the attacking. And for her to be the one to take on Biden, no one predicted that. No one saw that coming. And even as the night ended, Bernie never stepped in the ring against Biden. The only one that took him on, and took him on in a very deft way, as you say, and a very surgical way, was Kamala Harris. Who was all of this about? Everybody was going after Biden. Nobody went, but this very sharp and very savvy woman that took him on and took him down. And I think that was part of why he got a little rattled and didn't know how he was answering, because he went states' rights without even thinking. Because I think he was ready for Bernie. Yeah. He was not ready for Kamala, which has happened to too many women, especially black women. They're not ready for y'all.
Let me put, I feel like there's a hat or a bumper sticker in there for everyone to wear. Let me put the polls up. I mean, another reason she had nothing to lose and everything to gain by going after the front runner. I mean, Kamala Harris sits at 7% in the polls. Joe Biden is up at 32%. I don't think anyone is predicting that she closes that gap with a single debate performance, but she may very well have reshuffled the deck of this Democratic primary. If you're in your car, we've got Joe Biden at 32%, still a commanding lead. Bernie Sanders at 16, Elizabeth Warren at 12, and Kamala Harris at 7. Mayor Pete Buttigieg at 6.6%. I wonder, though, if there is an open question, or if you've seen enough to know the answer to whether Biden can change.
Well, I think, look, I mean, old dogs, new tricks, you know. I mean, he's been in politics a long time, and I do think there's a reason why Joe Biden has done fewer campaign events than anybody else in the field. There's a nervousness on his team about that, because when he has been let out become let out a free-range Biden. He's made mistakes. We saw it happen on the Hyde Amendment. The only reason this thing became an issue was the fact that he made the mistake last week in the fundraiser here when he raised the segregation of senators. If he hadn't made that mistake, there would have been no way to get at him in the way now Kamala might have found some other way to attack him, or someone else might have. But these are all things, everything that's come out of this whole debate thing that happened last night was a self-inflicted wound in the sense that if he hadn't made the mistake last week, he wouldn't be having to answer it. And then last night, of all the things, I mean, he did days of debate prep with some of the best debate preppers in the business, Ron Klain, and Anita Dunn, really people who've done presidential debate prep for cycle after cycle. And there were nervous emanations coming out of those debate prep sessions, yet this question had to have been something that he was prepped for. And yet in the moment, whether it was because he wasn't anticipating it coming from Harris or what, she prosecuted the case really well, but he could have deaded that thing with the right answer to her first question. He could have shut the thing down, maybe with an apology, maybe with some other thing, but he could have tamped it down. Instead, he stumbled into it and gave her more opportunities to keep coming back. So the performance mistakes are a huge problem for Biden. Can he change? I don't want to foreclose the possibility, but there's not been a sign of it yet that he's been able to make those changes.
The record is pretty clear, right? I mean, this is a guy who's run for president a number of times. My colleague Zach Carter wrote a piece that was headlined, "Joe Biden is bad at politics." And it's just true. I mean, I would say in a somewhat more limited sense that he seems to be really bad at winning primaries. When it came to the general election, I think he did a really good job in his debates in both in 2008 and in 2012. But Joe Biden has an amazing, spectacular record at really flopping at running for president. It's extraordinary.
Oh, goodness. All right, after the break.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.